What Bible version should I use? What Bible version should I avoid? What's a really great version of the Bible? These are all questions that I've gotten over the past 20 years. Hi, I'm Sam, and I'm a student of the Bible. I've been a pastor for 22 years, pretty well versed in Hebrew and Greek, and I write on my blog. And so I figured I would do a video today instead of writing on this topic because there's a lot of things to show, and it's really difficult to just type and write. So if you are newer to my blog, thanks for stopping by and thanks for saying hi to me and whatever. This is going to be an interesting video to explore. So this is a question I've been getting for the past 22 years from students, adults. What version of the Bible should I use? What's a good version of the Bible? What's a bad version of the Bible? All that kind of stuff. And that answer to that question is really tricky, actually. It's not as easy as one might think. Because the English versions of our Bibles are all translations. None of the Bible was originally written in the English language, so every single one of them is translated from another language, which means that we're kind of beholden to the translators and to their opinions about things and their interpretation of things. And we're going to see that as we walk through this video together. So that's something that we need to know right from the beginning, that everything has been translated. So nothing is original, and we have kind of got to do some good work on that. The other thing that I would say is this. If you're wondering about what version, and it's not in the English language, I'm not really an expert in any of that kind of stuff, and I don't really even know what I'm talking about when it comes to translating the Bible into other languages. So I'm only going to be focusing on the translation of the Bible into the English language. Okay, so a couple things. First off, we need to talk about the difference between the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament and the translation there. And we need to talk about some textual critical stuff that's going to be really important for us as we talk about interpretation, talk about translation, and which Bibles could be best for that kind of stuff. The first thing we need to note is that the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, was originally written in the Hebrew language. Some of it's Aramaic. During the exile, there's a few verses in Daniel and that kind of stuff that are in Aramaic, but most of it is in Hebrew. But at some point in between the 3rd and 2nd century BCE, before Christ, before the Common Era is what that means, it was translated from the Hebrew language into the Greek language, something called the Septuagint. As the story goes, there was about 70 editors and translators who got together, and over time translated and edited the Hebrew scriptures into the Greek language, because that was the common language of the day at that time, because Alexander the Great and his Greek Empire took over the whole world and they made everything Greek, and so why not? And so that version of the Hebrew scriptures is what was called the Septuagint. And you can pick one of these up today. It's not exactly the same as it was back then. It's been revised over the years, but it was kind of the standard. In fact, the Septuagint was the Hebrew Bible that Jesus would have read and his disciples would have read, the New Testament writers would use to quote from. So it's really important text for us to know. And every Septuagint also comes with the Apocrypha, or the what used to be kind of canonized but then got pulled out of the canon, and it's viewed as extra canon, extra biblical writings about history and that kind of stuff. But it's all great stuff. Here's the issue, though. That was like the standard for years, the Septuagint was. And then we had some archaeological finds that helped us understand there was a better text out there for the Hebrew Bible. And that's what's known as the Masoretic text. And that is what almost like 99% of our English Bibles, the Old Testament in them, is based off of what's called the Masoretic text. And you can find that Bible in the Jewish Publication Society's version of the Tanakh, okay, which is the law, the prophets, the writings, all that kind of stuff of the Hebrew Bible. It's in the Tanakh. And you can buy a Hebrew English one of these. You can buy just the English one. But what they discovered was that the Masoretic text of the Old Testament, or of the Hebrew Bible, differed from the Septuagint. And it became more reliable because it was earlier, it was older, and it was more closely, to the original than the Septuagint was. And what they discovered was in the Septuagint, there were some edits that were made, some things that needed to be changed. And so they some scribes, some people edited it and changed it to help make it make sense in the Greek language. And it actually provided some contextual problems. And I'm going to go over a couple of those. But a lot of times when the New Testament writers quote the Old Testament or quote the Hebrew Bible, they're actually quoting the Septuagint. And so that's why if you were ever to cross-reference, going through the New Testament and see like a quote from the Old Testament and you cross-reference it, sometimes it doesn't line up. And you're like, why doesn't it make sense? Why doesn't it line up? It's because the New Testament author is quoting the Septuagint, not the Masoretic text. But what we have in our Old Testament is the Masoretic text. So that's something important to know. But it's most of our Bibles, like 99% of them, the Masoretic text, what's in this is what we find in our Old Testament. Now, what's interesting about this and something we really need to talk about is that the Masoretic text is being translated through the eyes of a Christian interpreter. And so there's going to be things and choices that they make that the Hebrew people would not make, the Jewish people would not make as they read their Bible. And so that is important to know, that every translation of our English Bibles that is done from a Christian perspective is done through Christian lenses and Christian eyes. And the translations are beholden to those. Like the interpretation of the translator is woven into that. And sometimes even the theology behind the translator is imposed upon the text. And I'm going to show you that when we get to the New Testament, how certain versions are bent towards a certain theology because of the person who is, or the group that's translating, and the purpose of the translation. So we just need to know that. So if you want to just say, hey, I want to just look at the Hebrew text, not from a Christian perspective, but just from the Hebrew text, this one right here, the JPS Tanakh, is a really good way to look at that because this is from the Jewish perspective. Also, there's a translation that's more of a literary kind of a translation by Robert Alter called the Hebrew Bible, that he took a lot of work and a lot of time translating the Hebrew Bible from the original Hebrew language into the literary style. So he gets the idioms, he gets the figures of speech, the poetry, all that. He tries to help us understand what was really conveyed there and what was really going on there. So that's a really good one. It's by Robert Alter. It's a really great translation of the Hebrew text. But that's what most of our Old Testament in the English Bible is based off of, is the Masoretic text. And that's across the board. So there's not a lot of discrepancy. It's just based on different Bible versions and their interpreters and their translators who kind of weave their interpretation into the text as to why that would be different one to another. When we get to the New Testament, though, it becomes very different because there are two main Greek texts that we kind of wrestle with. There is what was used for years and years and years and years and interpreted and translated into multiple different Bibles, which is called the Textus Receptus, or the received text. And this is the text of the New Testament that was in the Koine Greek that Erasmus decided to go with. And what he did was, he took the Greek text, but he also took the Latin text, the Vulgate and all this other stuff, and he meshed it all together, and he wrote out the Textus Receptus. And this became the Greek translation behind a lot of the Bibles, like the Geneva Bible, the Wycliffe Bible, ultimately the King James Bible. And so when King James authorized the King James Bible to be done and to be translated, this was the Greek translation, the Textus Receptus, that they used. And in 1611, they wrote it all out, and then it's been revised since then. But some people have gone back and said 1611, that is it, the Textus Receptus. Well, that was like the major text of the New Testament that was used. We ended up finding in Alexandria, Egypt, we found other texts that were older, earlier, more reliable, and they actually had parts of the Textus Receptus not in them. And we started understanding that, maybe these texts are more reliable. Maybe some of the stuff that's in the Textus Receptus shouldn't be in there. They were edited by scribes, edited by monks, all that kind of stuff, and they got thrown in there. And so the Alexandrian text then became the Greek text to use, and there's all kinds of translations. Every other translation besides the New King James and the King James is taken out of the Alexandrian text. One of the fascinating translations that happened was the RSV, the Revised Standard Version. That came out like early 1930s, 1940s, something like that. And the Revised Standard Version was they took the Textus Receptus and then they edited it with the Alexandrian text. Sorry, went back through and made sure it was like the best of both worlds kind of a deal, and that became a revision upon the authorized text. And then they did the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, and then it just updated all of that kind of stuff. But the Alexandrian text is where we get things like the New American Standard, the ESV, the English Standard Version, the CSB Christian Standard Bible, the NLT is based off of this, NIV is based off of this. So that's the Alexandrian text. So these two, they're similar, but not exactly the same. And there's more in this one than in this one. This one's footnoted better than this one. But yeah, you just need to know that. So the question then comes, okay, so then which Bible is better? Well, it's kind of like a whatever you like, but you just need to know something. So if you're into the King James Bible, you love that, you grew up with it, that's your Bible, that's awesome. Love that for you. It's not for everybody. What you need to know if you pick the King James Bible is that it's based off of the Textus Receptus, and there are parts of it that weren't in the original manuscripts, that were edited in, they were added in. And so you just need to know that. And you need to know which parts are there. And so a good study Bible should show you which parts are actually in the oldest manuscripts and which ones aren't. And they should footnote that. They should edit all of that in there. And if they don't, I would avoid that because it's disingenuous. And it's kind of saying this is part of the Bible when it maybe really wasn't a part of it. So that's if you're a King James. If you're like, I can't really do the King James thing. I like the idea of the King James thing, but I don't love the language. It's really hard. Like I read the King James for my devotional time because that's the Bible I grew up with. It's kind of more devotionally oriented for me. But I know all of the issues with it. But I like reading that. But even in that, it's like I've been reading that Bible since I was like 5 years old. And yikes, it's still difficult to me at 43 years old. So if you can't quite get there, the New King James Bible is a really great update to that. It takes away a lot of the old English language that we don't speak anymore. But you still need to understand that it's based off the Textus Receptus, and we need to be aware of what should be in there, what shouldn't be in there, all that kind of stuff. If that's not your cup of tea, there's all kinds of great translations out of the Alexandrian text that I would love to go over. But I want to talk about some biases that are interpretive and translation biases that we need to be aware of that are in each one of these translations. Okay, so in the Alexandrian text side of the argument, there are what are called word-for-word translations, and there are dynamic equivalent translations. Word-for-word translations are each Greek word and its corresponding English word, and then making sense of the sentence. That's a word-for-word translation. These are Bibles like the NASB, the NRSV, the English Standard Version, ESV, the Christian Standard Bible. Those are like word-for-word. The dynamic equivalent is basically the translator looking at the sentence in Greek and going, okay, let's translate all the words and then let's make sense of it in our common language of what's going on now. What is the gist behind this? What's the idea behind this? Because sometimes if you just line up the word for word, it doesn't really make sense in our English language. You kind of go, that is a hard sentence to read. So the dynamic equivalent says, okay, let's make the sentence easier to read. Make it flow better. And so what you'll see in verse for verse, word for word translations is that verse, 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 verse. In dynamic equivalent, you'll see paragraphs, and you'll see it reads more like how we would normally read and write. So dynamic equivalents are things like the New Living Translation, the NIV, things of that nature. I think that even the NCV, the CEV, those kind of Bibles, those are all dynamic equivalent. And they take the main gist of the sentence and try to put it out there, and then they interpret words based upon how it makes sense in the sentence versus just this word, this word, this word, this word, this word. Here's the issue, though. The issue with all of these is that each one of these Bibles was commissioned by a team. A team was commissioned to translate them and interpret them. and they all have specific reasons and all have specific bents to them. For example, the NASB is bent very much towards a complementarian style of viewing men and women, and it's bent very much towards more of a reformed theology kind of a thing. So as the ESV went even further. So the ESV is very patriarchal, very reformed in its theology, and very complementarian in the way that they interpret things. And you end up seeing this stuff happening in certain verses, in certain parts of it. What you'll end up seeing is that their bias begins to show through a little bit. And especially if you read the Greek text, you're like, wait a second, that was an interpretation, that wasn't a translation. And you'll start to see that happening. You'll see their theological bias and their bent happening here and there. And I'm actually going to walk us through a couple of verses where that happens. One of the main things where we can see this is with the Greek word adelphoi. Okay, so the word adelphoi means brothers. Like I think Philadelphia, phila is love, adelphos is brothers, and so the city of brotherly love. But adelphoi is the plural form. It's a masculine plural, and in the way it's used in a more of like a noun kind of a thing, like. And so the way that it is normally used is in this, like, if we were to say like brothers, like that's the way they talked back then, or we would say it in our language, say like, hey, you guys. Now, when we're saying that, we don't mean, hey, only men. But that's how it can come across in the text. And so some of the dynamic equivalents and even some of the word-for-word translations nowadays, like NRSV is one that does this, they translate adelphoi as brothers and sisters. Because what they're trying to do is trying to convey in our time how we would use this word. But translations like the New American Standard, ESV, they only translate it brothers. And they do that for two reasons. Number one, they do it because it's a very literal reading of adelphoi, because it's a masculine plural word, so like brothers. But the second reason they do it is because both of these have a theological bent behind them that is complementarian, that is patriarchal, that really sees men as the head and women as not. And so they don't use the feminine in a lot of this, and they don't add sisters in it. They say no, and then you can tell it starts to have this bent. The second big way that you see this is something I want to show you in the text. It's actually Acts chapter 16, verse 7. And you can see the theological bend on each one of these interpretations. I'm not going to call these translations. These are different interpretations of the translation. And you can see that they are now using interpretive lens theologically and not just a translation. And so I want to take you over to each one of these texts. And I want to show you the difference between them, show you what the actual text says, and then we're going to talk about it. All right, so I have pulled up here Romans 16:7 right now in the Greek, and then we'll look at a bunch of different English translations. But I just want to show you a few things. Okay, so the Greek reads this way. It reads, Spasaste andronikon kai union tous sungenes mu kai sunai kam malotus mu hointinus esin episomoi and tois apostolois hoi kai pra emu gagognon and Christo. Okay, a lot of Greek words there. Some things I want you to pay attention to. So these two names here, andronikon and eunion, are important. Okay, so andronikon or andronicus is it's a noun, and it is in the accusative masculine singular. Okay, so it is a name of a man, and then eunion is a noun also, but it's in the accusative feminine singular, meaning this is a name of a female. This is a woman. Okay, now here's where I take issue, because andronicus is a male name. Junius, though, is also a male name. Junius is not a female name. If it was female, this would be Junia. Problem is, this is a female we're talking about here, and they've right here, even Bible Hub has said Junius is how it should be translated. I take issue with that. That's not correct. It should be Junia because it is the female version of it. In fact, in this time frame when Romans was written, Junius was we only find that in one writing ever. Junia was always the name. So Junius wasn't even a name back then, basically, of a man. It was the name of a woman, Unia, all the time. Okay. The other thing we want to know is that they are fellow prisoners with me who are, look at this, who are of note. That's that word, epistemoi, of note, among, here, this word here is so important. Among tois apostolos, the apostles, among the apostles, with the apostles, among the apostles. Okay. Now we're going to look at how these verses are translated in each one of these different translations, and we're going to see something fascinating. Check this out. So let's look at the English Standard Version first, okay? So greet Andronicus and Junia. Okay, that's important that they translated it Junia, which is a female name. My kinsmen and my fellow prisoners, they are well known to the apostles. Now there's a big difference between the word to and the word with and among, okay? So if I'm talking to my wife, it's different than talking with my wife or among my wife. Like if I am with you, it's different than I am to you or among you, right? And so I think the English Standard Version here mistranslates one word here, and it changes the entire meaning of the sentence. Mistranslating the word among to the word to means the difference between Andronicus and Junia being among the apostles versus that they are well known to the apostles. That's a big difference. And the reason that this is happening is because the translators of the English Standard Version are not translating this, they are interpreting this. And they're using their own bias of complementarianism, which means that women cannot be pastors, cannot be teachers, cannot be apostles. And they are using that framework to interpret instead of translate this verse. And so now Junia cannot be an apostle. She has to be well known to the apostles. Just something to be aware of, okay? Let's go down here to the New American Standard Bible, okay? So greet Andronicus and Junia, my kinsfolk and my fellow prisoners, who are outstanding in the view of the apostles, who also were in Christ before me. That's way wrong. That's not even close to what, I don't know where in the view of comes from. It's not in the Greek text. So this, once again, is an interpretation based upon a bias, based upon a theology, a dogma they placed upon the text, instead of translating the text for what is really there, okay? Here's what's fascinating, though. In 1995, in the New American Standard, this is how it was translated. Greet Andronicus and Junius. They've decided to put Junia as the male name. My kinsmen and my fellow prisoners, who are outstanding among the apostles. So guess what? They got that part of the sentence right, as they translated, but they changed Junia to Junius to be a male so that he could be an apostle. Yeah. So anyway, same thing. Christian Standard Bible. This is one that was done a few years back that replaced the Holman Christian Standard Bible. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my fellow Jews and fellow prisoners. They are noteworthy in the eyes of the apostles. That is a major interpretation. That is not a translation. There is a major flaw here in the interpretation, in the translation of this text. The eyes of the apostles is nowhere in the Greek. So that's really important to understand, okay? So let's do a couple more. Let's look at the New International Version. Okay, that's right over here at the top. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my fellow Jews, who have been in prison with me. They are outstanding among the apostles, and they were in Christ before I was. So New International Version, which is the dynamic equivalent, gets it right. Translates the Greek word for word, both in names and in function, okay? So the New Living Translation, another popular one. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my fellow Jews who are in prison with me. They are highly respected among the apostles. and became followers of Christ before I did. Now, that one can go either way, and I think they did that on purpose. They were kind of like, well, I don't know. We don't know if we want to take a stand one way or another on this one, so we're just going to split this one down the middle and say they're highly respected among the apostles, which they're outstanding among the apostles, kind of same thing. But you can read that either way and be okay on either side of that fence. So that's how the New Living Translation does it. So they don't really interpret it. They just kind of leave it open. King James, look at what they do here. Salute Andronicus and Junia, my kinsmen and my fellow prisoners, who are of note among the apostles, who were also in Christ before me. So they also it's also kind of like up in the air, not really making a statement one way or another. But, that's what the King James does with that verse. And then let's go down and find the New Revised Standard Version, which is right here. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my relatives who were in prison with me. They are prominent among the apostles and were in Christ before I was. And so I hope this was just enlightening for you to see that, when you have translations of the Bible, there is a Greek text that they're translating from, and each translation actually is using each of the translators they're using interpretive things to make sure that they put in the text what they want in the text. Sometimes the bias shows through pretty heavy, and you start going, wait, that's not in the Greek. Why did they make that decision? Why did they do that? Well, you start to see their bias show through. And you can do with that what you want. I just wanted to show you one of these things just to know that when you have an English translation of the Bible, we are, like I said at the beginning of the video, the issue is these are all not originally in English, and so they're translated into English, and we are at we're beholden to the translator and to their unique interpretations of what they are reading in the Greek language or in the Hebrew, and then how they are translating. So it's important to know this stuff. It's important to go back to, like, this Bible Hub thing is really great because it can help you navigate some of this and go, wait a second, that's not exactly what it says here. Wait a second, it can't be Junius, the male version of this name, because this is a feminine word. This is a girl. And so it should have been translated better than that, So we really need to go, hey, what's really going on here? And to know that, all right? So I'm going to get out of this, and then I'm going to come back and talk about what are my takeaways from this. So what are my takeaways from this? Well, for me personally, here's what I go with. When I read the Bible and when I teach the Bible to other people, I use the New International Version, the NIV. Two reasons. Number one, I find it to be pretty accurate, and it reads really well in our English language. It's not clunky, and it's pretty true to the Greek text. There's a few decisions here and there that are like, and that as a pastor I can point that out and show, but for the most part it's pretty accurate to the text, and it's very helpful. And as you read it, the reading equivalent, I think of it, is like 8th grade reading or something like that, so majority of people can grasp onto it. And then the second reason I do it is because it's one of the most popular Bibles that's out there. Most people have their hands on it. And so if most people are, then I can easily reference it for people who are reading the Bible. There are other issues with people actually reading the Bible. That's a bigger deal. But NIV is what I go with when I'm preaching, teaching, all that kind of stuff. Personal study, though, it's this. It's my New Revised Standard Version, the Oxford Annotated Bible. I love this because of the study notes that are in it, because of the footnotes that are in it, all of the background information on all of the books. There's essays in the back of why they chose what they did. Just great stuff. Plus the NRSV, I think really does both. It does a word-for-word translation, but it also picks up the nuances of certain things. And so I use that for my personal studying, along with Greek and Hebrew and that kind of stuff. And then NIV for my for teaching and just my public consumption of the scriptures. Like I said earlier, though, I use the KJV for my devotional time because that just kind of feels a little bit like when I was a kid. And reading the Bible that way. And sometimes that is helpful for you. And I know all the issues that go along with the KJV, so that kind of is in the back of my head every time I'm reading it. But so then the big question comes up: what do we do with something like the Message? Okay, that's a question I got asked by students that all the time. The Message is a paraphrase of the Bible. Eugene Peterson, the late Eugene Peterson, was a pretty good Hebrew and Greek linguistic student of the Bible, and he took how he translated the text, and he was like, okay, how do I figure out how to put this into modern language? And so he did the very best he could in putting it in modern language. It's dated now, so it's not really modern language, so it's just fascinating when you read it. But it's not going to be the word-for-word equivalent that you're going to see. It's a paraphrase of it, trying to get the gist of it. So if you're not into that, if you're not into reading paraphrases of the Bible, but into reading the words, and you think that that's the authoritative thing, then don't pick the Message. Pick one of the others. But just know the difference. There's the word for word, there's the dynamic equivalent, and then there's the paraphrase. Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with me and talking about this topic. And hopefully you can find a Bible translation that fits you and that helps you grow to know Jesus better and love others better. And I think we'll all be better for that. All right. Have a great day.